What I am about to tell you was never hidden from the world out of cruelty. It was hidden in plain sight behind the one barrier that has kept more men from greatness than poverty, than misfortune, than every external circumstance combined. That barrier is the quiet assumption made by nearly every man who has ever encountered these laws that he already understands them. Carnegie knew these laws. Edison knew them. Ford knew them. Every man whose name has outlasted his century knew them not as poetry, not as inspiring sentiment to be admired and set aside, but as mechanics, as precise working laws, as reliable in their operation as the law that brings an apple to the ground. There is a profound difference between a man who has heard a principle and a man whose mind has been permanently altered by it. A man can hear the same truth 100 times, nod at it, agree with it, even repeat it to others thus, and remain entirely unmoved. And then, nod at it, agree with it, even repeat it to others thus, and remain entirely unmoved. And then, on the 101st hearing, at the right moment, arranged in the right sequence, something shifts, not added information, a different mind. That is the purpose of the hour ahead of you, not to teach you anything new, to arrange what you already suspect is true into a sequence that produces the shift, the kind that once it happens cannot be undone. Because once a mind has genuinely understood how thought becomes circumstance, not as theory but as mechanism, it cannot unknow this. And the moment it cannot unknow it, drift becomes impossible. Part 1. Thoughts are things, the first law, and why most men treat it as poetry when it is mechanics. Every man who has spent any time around this philosophy has at some point encountered the statement, thoughts are things. Most men nod when they hear it. They accept it as a pleasant sentiment, the kind of phrase that at some point encountered the statement, thoughts are things. Most men nod when they hear it. They accept it as a pleasant sentiment, the kind of phrase that sounds inspiring on a wall calendar, and then they return to their lives and continue to treat their thoughts exactly as they treated them before, as private events occurring somewhere behind the eyes, with no more weight in the world than a breath of air. I want to begin by telling you about a physician I came to know, and a patient he was called to examine. The woman had stopped eating, and a patient he was called to examine. The woman had stopped eating, not by deliberate refusal, but because she had become convinced over weeks through a slow accumulation of worry and fear that her body could no longer retain food. There was nothing organically wrong with her stomach, her digestion, or any other part of her physical machinery. Every examination confirmed it. And yet she was wasting away because she had handed to her own subconscious mind, through repetition and belief, a single instruction. Food cannot be kept down, and her subconscious mind, which I want you to understand, does not pause to question the wisdom of the instructions it receives, had obeyed that instruction with perfect fidelity. The physician's remedy was not medical in the conventional sense. Perfect fidelity. The physician's remedy was not medical in the conventional sense. Open quote. Real quick, I want to step out of the lesson and just talk to you. We hit 300,000 subscribers. And honestly, I'm a little lost for words. Every one of those is a person who let me be a small part of their day, their journey, their hope for something more. That's sacred to me. And if you're one of them, I want you to really hear this. You are exactly where you need to be among people who believe. Really hear this. You are exactly where you need to be among people who believe in the same beautiful possibility you do. You're not behind, you're not too late, you're right on time. Thank you for being here. It means the world. By the way, if you still have not checked the first link in the description, I highly encourage you to do so. You can get an auto-suggestion sheet for completely free, so go and grab it now. Close quote. He spent time with her. He restored patiently and deliberately. Her faith first in something larger than her immediate circumstances, and then in the simple mechanical reliability of her own body. He gave her, in effect, a new instruction to replace the old one, and he gave it to her with the same repetition and the same emotional weight that the old instruction had carried. She ate on the day he left her bedside. She was out of bed within 3 days. I want you to sit with what that story actually demonstrates, because it is not a story. She was out of bed within 3 days. I want you to sit with what that story actually demonstrates, because it is not a story about medicine. It is a demonstration of a law, and the law operates whether the man applying it understands it or not. Here is the law stated as precisely as I can state it. Every thought impulse, whether negative or positive, that reaches the subconscious mind, and thought impulses are reaching it constantly, whether you are aware of them or not, is eventually translated by the subconscious into its physical equivalent. The subconscious does not examine whether the thought is deserved, rational, or true. It does not ask for evidence. It receives the instruction, and it builds toward it with the same blind faithfulness that a contractor brings to a blueprint, even when the blueprint contains an error. This law operates in both directions, with identical precision. A thought mixed with fear produces in time the physical equivalent of fear. A thought mixed with faith produces in time the physical equivalent of faith. The man who dwells upon poverty, who worries about it constantly, speaks of it at every meal, fears it above all other things, is not merely describing a condition he finds himself in. He is issuing an instruction, and the law, being entirely impartial, carries out that instruction with the same diligence it would bring to the opposite one. Here is the part of this law that most men never grasp, and it is the most important part. Instruction with the same diligence it would bring to the opposite one. Here is the part of this law that most men never grasp, and it is the most important part. This law operates whether or not a man knows about it. The man who has never once heard the word autosuggestion is at this very moment using it, planting in his subconscious mind through the dominant pattern of his daily thought. The precise impressions his circumstances 1 year from now will be built from. The only choice any man has ever had in this matter is not whether the law operates on him. It always does. The only choice is whether he directs it or whether he leaves the direction to chance, to habit, and to whatever thought happens to occupy his mind, most often by default. Let me give you one more illustration. This one of a man who used the law, though he could not have named it at the time. He was a grocery clerk, earning $20 a week, with nothing about him that any observer would have called remarkable. One day he found himself standing in a line at a cafeteria, a tin tray in his hands, waiting his turn to be served. And something happened in his mind as he stood there, not an external event, nothing visible to anyone watching him. A thought arranged itself. He looked at the system in front of him, people serving themselves, moving along a line, taking what they wanted without the intervention of a clerk at every step. And he saw in his imagination that same system planted into a grocery store. He had not invented anything. The idea of self-service already existed right in front of him in the cafeteria. What he did was take an idea that existed in one place and see it operating in another. That is the precise definition of what I call cynic imagination, the rearrangement of existing materials into a new combination. And from that single mental act performed by a $20 a week clerk holding a tin tray came the Piggly Wiggly chain of self-service grocery stores. And the $20 a week clerk became a man whose name was worth millions. His name was Clarence Saunders. And I want you to notice nothing about his external circumstances changed in the moment the idea occurred to him. What changed was a thought. The circumstances followed as they always do, and as the law guarantees they will. Once a man genuinely understands this, not as a phrase to be admired, but as a law as real and as mechanical as the law that holds a river to its channel. Yes, not as a phrase to be admired, but as a law as real and as mechanical as the law that holds a river to its channel. He cannot go back to treating his thoughts as private and weightless. The first law has been heard, and the mind that has heard it has already in some small but permanent way begun to change. Part 2, the workshop of the mind imagination, the faculty that turns desire into plans and plans into reality. I want to take you back to a problem that for a period of years, every man who understood electricity in that era considered essentially unsolvable. It was well known that a fine wire heated by an electrical current would produce light. This was not a secret. Any competent electrician of the time could have told you as much. The difficulty that had stopped every man who attempted it was that the wire always burned through before it could produce useful sustained light. The known facts pointed to every man who attempted it was that the wire always burned through before it could produce useful sustained light. The known facts pointed toward an answer, and at the same time toward an obstacle that seemed to make the answer impossible. The man who eventually solved this problem did not discard what was already known. He did something else entirely. He took everything that was known, every fact, every failed attempt, every partial success, and began arranging and rearranging it in his mind, testing combination after combination. Not with his hands at first, but in the workshop that exists behind every man's eyes. He tried more than 10,000 combinations through this faculty before the answer arrived. Not 10,000 experiments in a laboratory, though those came too, but 10,000 arrangements of thought tested in the imagination, most of them discarded until one of them held. That man's name was Thomas Edison, and the incandescent light was not in its origin a piece of glass and wire. It was an act of imagination performed long before it was an act of manufacture. I want to describe to you the two forms this faculty takes, because both of them matter, and most men know the name of only one. The first is synthetic imagination, the faculty by which a man arranges existing ideas, existing knowledge, existing experience into new combinations. This faculty creates nothing from nothing. It works only with material that is already available, facts, observations, the accumulated experience of a lifetime, and rearranges that material into forms it has not previously taken. This is the faculty Edison used in the 10,000 combinations. It is the faculty most men will use most often because it works with what they already possess. The second is creative imagination, and this faculty operates differently. Through it, the finite mind of a man makes direct contact with something larger than his own accumulated knowledge. It is the faculty through which hunches arrive, through which the solution to a problem appears in the mind, not as the product of visible reasoning, but as a completed thought, arriving from somewhere the man cannot precisely locate. This faculty becomes active when the conscious mind is vibrating at an unusually rapid rate, most often under the stimulus of an intense and burning desire. Both faculties, and this is the part I want you to remember, grow stronger with use, exactly as a muscle does, and grow weak through neglect, exactly as a muscle does. A man's imagination does not die from disuse, but it becomes quiet. It becomes difficult to summon, and a man who has spent years without using it finds when he finally needs it that it answers slowly, not because the faculty is exercised. I want to tell you about a man whose entire career was built on the deliberate cultivation of this faculty, a man whose method, to anyone who did not understand what he was doing, would have looked like nothing at all. His name was Dr. Elias Gates, and he had a considerable reputation in the world of science. When he encountered a problem that ordinary reasoning could not solve, and in his line of work such problems were common, he would go into a small plain room he had set aside for exactly this purpose. Close the door, sit at a bare table with nothing on it but paper and pencil, and concentrate his entire mind on everything he already knew about the problem. He would hold that concentration, not racing through ideas, but holding the known elements of the problem steadily in his attention until ideas began to arrive. Sometimes they came slowly. On at least one occasion, they came so quickly that he was able to keep his pen moving fast enough to capture what was arriving in his mind. When the flow stopped and he examined what he had written, he found laid out in detail the solution to the problem. He had been sitting with a solution that contained information he could not account for through any process of ordinary reasoning he had performed. Through this method, sitting, concentrating, and writing what arrived, Dr. Gates completed more than 200 patents that other inventors had begun and abandoned, unable to finish. Some of the largest companies in the country paid him by the hour simply to sit in a room and think. I tell you this not so that you will go sit in a room, though there are worse uses of an hour. I tell you this because it demonstrates in its purest and strangest form what the workshop of the mind is capable of producing. When a man gives it material to work with, a problem held steadily, a desire genuinely felt, and then great achievement that has ever existed in the history of human effort began as a thought held in someone's imagination before it existed anywhere else. Here's the gap between the people who manifest wealth and the people who only watch videos about it. The wealthy install the idea daily until the mind accepts it as already done. You can't do that from memory. You need it in front of you. That's why I made the free auto-suggestion sheet. One morning and night, and you start reprogramming your self-image. It's free at the first link in the description. Open quote. Open quote. Desire alone is nothing. It is formless, a vague wanting that produces nothing itself, but desire brought into the workshop of the imagination, given shape, turned into a plan, held with vividness and detail that is the beginning of every invention, every structure of lasting value that has ever been built. The instruction is simple, though most men never follow it. Use the workshop. Build in your own mind a clear and detailed picture of what you intend, not a vague wish. Picture with edges, with detail, with the texture of something real. Hold that picture. Return to it. Because to the subconscious mind, which as we have already established, does not distinguish between the vividly imagined and the externally real. A picture held with sufficient feeling and sufficient persistence is already, in the most important sense, underway. Close quote. Close quote. Part 3. The law that turns adversity into advantage. Every defeat carries the seed and the men who found it. I want to share with you the most uncomfortable conclusion I reached in 30 years of studying the lives of successful men. Uncomfortable because it offers no shortcut and because it suggests something about the nature of achievement that men would rather not hear. Of the men whose records I examined, men whose names have outlasted their lifetimes by a wide margin, nearly every one of them was beset at some point by difficulties severe enough that an outside observer would have called them not minor setbacks. Severe, often prolonged periods of defeat, during which nothing about their circumstances suggested that anything remarkable lay ahead. This was not coincidence. After enough repetition, a pattern stops being coincidence and starts being a law. And the law, as I came to understand it, is this. With every experience of temporary defeat, every failure, every form of adversity, comes the seed of an equivalent advantage. Not the advantage itself, not the full-grown result. The seed, small, often invisible at the time, frequently unrecognized for years, but present without exception in every case I have examined. I want to tell you about a man I knew who applied this law to something most men consider for purely a liability: his enemies. Over a long career, this man had accumulated what could honestly be called a substantial collection of enemies, men who actively worked against him, who spread reports calculated to damage his reputation, who took evident satisfaction in any setback he experienced. Most men in his position would have spent considerable energy either nursing resentment or scheming to neutralize them. He did neither. What he had come to understand was this: his enemies were doing something for him that his friends never would. His friends, out of loyalty and genuine affection, would never tell him about his weaknesses, even the ones they could plainly see. But his enemies had no such restraint. They were actively searching for every flaw, every weak spot, every place where his character or his work might be vulnerable. And when they found such a place, they did not keep it to themselves. They announced it, often loudly, to anyone who would listen. He began quite deliberately to treat these announcements as a form of free instruction. Where his enemies pointed there, he looked, and more often than he expected, they were right. He told me once that if he had no enemies, he would feel obligated to create a few. Because the alternative, going through life with his weaknesses, known only to himself, or not known to any reliable mechanism for finding them. That seed inside an adversity that looks on its surface like pure liability. I do not ask you to take this principle only on the strength of another man's story. I have lived it myself, and I want to tell you about the night I discovered what called ever since my other self. There was a night. I will not take you through every detail of the circumstances that led to it, except to say that everything I had spent years building seemed on that night to be collapsing around me at once. I walked that evening around the outside of a schoolhouse in West Virginia in a state of fear I had not previously experienced and have not experienced since. Every reasonable assessment of my circumstances at that moment would have concluded that I was finished. And on that night, at the lowest point I had reached, I discovered something I could not have found any other way. I discovered that behind the reasoning mind, the mind that was on that night entirely overwhelmed, there was something else. A force that did not panic when the reasoning mind panicked. A presence I could lean upon in a spirit of absolute faith, precisely because the ordinary faculties of my mind had nothing further to offer. I would not wish to repeat any amount of wealth give back what I learned from it. That discovery, made entirely because of an adversity I would have done anything to avoid, became the foundation for everything I built afterward. Now I want to give you the distinction that makes all of this practical, because without it, the principle of adversity as seed remains merely comforting. Rather, there is a wide difference between temporary defeat and failure. Temporary defeat is an event, something that happens to a man, often through no fault of his own, sometimes through circumstances entirely outside his control. Failure is not an event. Failure is a conclusion, a decision a man reaches after a temporary defeat, that the defeat is permanent. No man has ever truly failed who refused to draw that conclusion, who continued after every setback to treat it as temporary and to search it for whatever seed it contained. The men who go down permanently are not, in most cases, the men who experience the worst defeats. They are the men who drew the conclusion too soon, who stopped looking for the seed before the seed had time to be. There is a poem that has stayed with me for many years, and I want to share a portion of it with you because it expresses this law more powerfully than I can in plain prose. It describes what happens when nature, in the poet's words, wants to drill a man and thrill a man and skill a man. When she wants to mold a man to play the noblest part. Watch her methods, the poem says. Watch her ways, how she hammers him and hurts him and with mighty blows converts him into shapes that only nature understands. The hammering, in other words, is not punishment. It is preparation. And the man who can look at his current difficulty, whatever it may be, and ask sincerely, where is the seed in this? That man has already found something more valuable than the comfort of having avoided the difficulty. Altogether, he has found the seed, and the seed properly planted is the most important thing found. Part 4. The personality that attracts in the law behind it, what makes men seek you out and follow you without being asked. I want to tell you about an afternoon in my office and about a smile. My secretary informed me that an elderly woman had arrived asking to see me personally. She would not state her business to anyone else and would not be turned away. I assumed reasonably enough that she had something to sell, and I decided I would go meet her myself, and out of simple courtesy, purchase whatever it was, whatever its cost. I walked down the corridor toward the reception room, and before I had reached her, before a single word had passed between us, she had already done something to me. She was smiling. I have seen a great many people smile in my life. I have never before or since seen anyone smile quite the way this woman smiled. It was not a polite smile, not a practiced smile, not the kind of smile a person puts on for an occasion. It reached me from across the room, and by the time I had crossed the distance between us, I had already decided, without knowing what she was selling, without having heard her say a word, that I would buy it. I want you to sit with that for a moment because it is the clearest illustration I know of what an attractive personality actually is and what it is not. It is not clothing, though. Clothing matters. It is not posture, though. Posture matters. It is not a handshake or a tone of voice, though both of these matter a great deal. An attractive personality at its foundation is the outward and largely involuntary expression of an inward character. Specifically, a character that has developed the genuine habit of taking a sincere interest in the well-being of the people it encounters. That woman's smile was not a technique. It was the visible signal of something true about her character, transmitted without her conscious direction received by me before either of us had spoken. Here is why this matters beyond questions of likability. There is a law, I have called it the law of retaliation, though it might equally be called the law of attraction, because the two are the same law viewed from different directions. Let me make you an offer the old teachers never could. For the price of lunch, I'll walk you through 14 days of the exact auto-suggestion ritual, a daily money decree, the identity work, all of it to pull your first unexpected $100 into your life. And that 100 isn't the point. It's the proof these teachings actually work. If nothing shows up, you pay nothing. That's the 14-day money magnet protocol. Test this law on your own life. Go to the second link in the description. Every act of genuine kindness, every gesture of real interest in another person's concerns sets in motion a force that returns not always from the same person, not always in the same form, but with the reliability of any other law of nature. Like attracts like. A man whose character is dominated by genuine interest in the success and well-being of others draws to himself over time people and circumstances that harmonize with that character. A man whose character is dominated by suspicion, resentment, or self-int draws to himself exactly the same. And here's the parts men miss. This is not a matter of performance. A man cannot maintain an attractive personality on the outside while harboring envy, hatred, or selfishness on the inside. Because these inward states transmit themselves through channels other people feel but cannot always name. They simply sense without being able to explain why that something is not right, and they withdraw even from a man who has done nothing to them directly. The magnet a man builds in his own character is built by what he actually is, not by what he is able to display when he is being observed. I want to tell you about a young man named Carroll D.S. who went to work for the great automobile manufacturer W.C. Durant. In a position that gave no particular indication of where it might lead, D.S. noticed something in his first weeks there. Durant remained at the office working long after every other employee had gone home for the evening. No one asked D.S. to stay. Nothing in his job description required it. But he began staying as well, not in order to be seen, not as a calculated maneuver, but simply because it seemed to him that someone ought to be there in case Durant needed anything. And Durant did need things. From time to time, a file brought, a small task performed, some minor service that took only a moment. Each time he looked around for someone, and each time DS was there. This continued quietly, without comment for some time. When I later asked DS how he had risen in a relatively short span to become the president of one of Durant's distributing companies, his answer was 4 words. He got into the habit of calling on me. Read that again because it contains the entire principle. DS did not demand recognition. He did not announce his availability. He simply made himself through consistent and unrequested service. The person Durant's mind turned to without thinking, and that habit formed in Durant's mind through repetition, eventually placed DS in a position that no amount of direct request could have secured nearly as quickly or as permanently. This brings me to a formula I want you to remember. 3 letters: quality of service, quantity of service, and spirit of service. The first two are what most men think of when they think of doing good work. The third is the one that determines more than the other 2 combined what a man's service is actually worth to the people who receive it. Andrew Carnegie, who built one of the great fortunes of his era, would not retain a man regardless of how excellent or how abundant his work was if that man did not work in a spirit of harmony. A man who performs excellent work with a resentful, grudging spirit communicates that resentment to everyone the work touches, and its value is diminished accordingly. A man who performs good work with genuine enthusiasm and harmony communicates that as well, and it multiplies the value of everything he does. Part 5. The law of increasing returns. Why the man who gives more than he takes becomes irresistible. There is a story about a department store that I have told many times because it demonstrates in the simplest possible terms a law that most men go their entire lives without understanding. A woman came into the Marshall Field store carrying a blouse she wished to return. She had worn the blouse. By any reasonable standard, she had no legitimate claim to a refund. The merchandise had been used and the transaction was strictly speaking complete. The store could have refused her and would have been entirely within its rights to do so. Instead, the return was accepted without argument, without hesitation, and without making the woman feel in any way that she had asked for something she was not entitled to. She knew, of course, that she had received more than the strict terms of the transaction required, and she did what people do when they have received more than they expected. She told everyone she knew. The story of how she had been treated traveled through her entire circle of acquaintances, and the store received from that single act of giving more than was required, more genuine promotion than it could have purchased, with 10 times the value of the blouse in advertising. This is the law of increasing returns stated in its simplest form. Render more than is required, and what comes back exceeds often considerably what was given. I want to state this law precisely because it is not a moral suggestion. It is an observable mechanism. There is a principle in nature by which the man who consistently renders more service and better service than that for which he is paid eventually finds himself paid for more than he performs. This is not charity, returning to the giver in some vague spiritual sense. It operates through specific traceable mechanisms, through reputation, which spreads as the story of the blouse spread without the man's direct effort, through the simple scarcity of people willing to do more than required, which makes such a person conspicuous by comparison to everyone around him, and through the compounding effect of habits of excellence practiced consistently, which build a capability that eventually exceeds what the original arrangement ever anticipated. The man who does only what he is paid to do is at every moment exactly even. He has given nothing beyond what was purchased, and he has received nothing beyond what was paid. He is not building anything. He is simply trading hours for wages in a transaction that by its nature can never produce more than it contains. The man who consistently gives more is doing something entirely different. He is building a surplus not of money, but of reputation, capability, and demonstrated character. And that surplus, like any other form of capital, accumulates and eventually begins to produce returns of its own. I want you to consider an illustration from the physical world that makes this principle impossible to misunderstand. If a man wished to develop a powerful right arm, the worst conceivable method would be to tie that arm to his side and give it complete rest. Rest does not produce strength. It produces atrophy. Strength comes only through use, through resistance, through the demand placed upon the muscle that forces it to grow beyond its previous capacity. The strongest tree in the forest is not the one sheltered from the wind. It is the one standing in the open that has had to develop the strength to withstand what the sheltered trees never had to face. The man who renders more service than he is paid for is doing with his capabilities precisely what the exposed tree does with its structure. He is subjecting himself to a demand that forces growth, and the growth, once it has occurred, cannot be undone. His capacity expands, and a capacity that has expanded does not remain invisible for long. It eventually commands a price that matches what it has become, whether or not anyone has formally acknowledged the change. Now I must tell you about the one obstacle that stands in the way of this entire law. An obstacle so common that I have come to think of it as a mountain standing exactly where the temple of a man's success is meant to be built, and which must be removed before any building can take place. The obstacle is a feeling, and I suspect you have felt it because nearly everyone has at some point. It is the feeling that one has been cheated unless every act of service receives immediate and exact material compensation. In its crudest form, this feeling says, I am not paid to do this, and I will not do it. This feeling, wherever it exists in a man's character, places a ceiling on everything above it. It cannot be argued away. It yields to nothing except the deliberate, repeated practice of doing precisely the opposite of rendering service beyond what is required, not because it produces an immediate return, but because the habit itself is the foundation on which every return that follows will eventually be built. Part 6. The Master Secret Definitesse, Decision, and the Irreversible Power of Cosmic Habit Force. I want to put before you a question I have spent a great deal of my working life trying to answer. Why do two men equal in intelligence, equal in education, beginning from circumstances that on paper are essentially identical, arrive 20 years later at entirely different destinations? Not slightly different, entirely different. One man has built something. The other man has spent the same 20 years in motion, working hard, often working harder than the first man, and has arrived in the end very close to where he started. Before this video ends, make a decision. Keep wishing for money or start attracting it on purpose. Getting rich was never an accident. It's a mind trained to expect wealth. I've made the first step free for you. One page that reprograms your money mind. Go to thesecondlife.com, download your free Get Rich Auto Suggestion Sheet, and begin tonight. Don't let this be one more video you watched and forgot. Links in the description. I have examined this question in the records of more than 25,000 people, and the answer, stripped of every elaboration, comes down to a single word. Definitesse. Not talent. Talent is common, not luck. Luck, examined closely, tends to favor the men who were already moving in a direction because a man in motion encounters opportunities a man standing still never sees. The decisive difference is this. One man knew with precision what he wanted. He had written it down. He had attached to it a time frame and a plan. He held it with a desire strong enough to survive temporary defeat, and he did not retreat from it. The other man wanted things too in a general sense. He wanted more than he had, wanted to do better. Wanted in the vague way that almost everyone wants something, but he had never made that wanting definite. And a desire that has never been made definite produces motion without direction. I want you to picture a steamship that has lost its rudder in the middle of the ocean. The engines have not failed. The ship continues to burn fuel at exactly the rate it always did. It continues to move. There is nothing wrong with its capacity for motion, but without a rudder, the ship begins to circle. It burns through its fuel with the same energy it would have used on a direct course to its destination. And at the end of that fuel, having expended the same effort, having moved the same distance through the water, it has arrived nowhere. It is, if anything, farther from its destination than when it started, because it has used up the means by which it might have traveled there. I have watched a great many men live out the entirety of their working lives in precisely this condition. Not idle, busy, often exhausted by the end of each day, with every appearance of effort in motion, but without a rudder. And at the end of their working years, when the fuel, the years, the energy, the opportunities has been spent, they find themselves circling very near to where they began, unable to account for where it all went. Definitesse requires a companion, and that companion is decision. A definite chief aim is not merely conceived. It must be decided upon promptly, and that decision must be held with some firmness against the pressure that will inevitably arise to undo it. In my examination of those 25,000 individuals, I found something remarkable. The men who achieved outstanding success were without exception men of prompt decision, prompt even in matters of small importance. The men who did not achieve such success were almost without exception slow to decide, and when they did decide, they tended to reverse themselves at the first sign of resistance. Indecision and procrastination travel together. Where you find one, you will generally find the other close behind, and both of them, left unaddressed, produce the same destination: a man whose circumstances direct him rather than a man who directs his circumstances. I want to give you one final illustration of decision, perhaps the most dramatic one I know. When a great commander brought his armies across the ocean to a foreign shore, intending to conquer it, he gave an order that on its surface seems almost reckless. Burn the ships. Every vessel that had carried his men across the water was set on fire in full view of the army before a single battle had been fought. He told his men plainly, "There is no way back. We win here or we do not return at all." That single act, the burning of the ships, removed from every man on that shore the option of retreat. And removing the option of retreat did something to those men that no speech, no inspiration, no encouragement could have done on its own. It made the decision irreversible. And an irreversible decision produces a depth of commitment that a reversible one never can, because the subconscious mind, which responds to the actual depth of a commitment rather than to the words used to describe it, knows the difference between a man who has left himself a way out and a man who has not. This brings me to the deepest law I know. The law beneath all the others. The law that determines in the end which direction everything else in this hour will carry you. I call it cosmic habit force. It is the mechanism by which nature takes whatever pattern of thought and action a man repeats and makes that pattern permanent. It is the same law that takes a river's repeated path and carves it into a channel. The same law that takes a musician's repeated practice and turns it into an ability exercised without conscious thought. The same law that takes a man's repeated thoughts about himself, about his prospects, about what is and is not possible for him, and converts those thoughts, given enough repetition, into the fixed and settled conditions of his life. This law is entirely impartial. It does not prefer success to failure. It does not care which habits a man forms. It simply makes whatever habits he forms permanent. And here is why this matters more than anything else in this hour. Every day that passes is a day in which this law is operating, regardless of whether the man is aware of it. Today's habits, the thoughts repeated today, the patterns followed today, are by the operation of this law becoming tomorrow's fixed conditions. The only question that has ever mattered is which habits are being deepened today while the man is or is not paying attention. Part 7. The mind that cannot go back. What changes permanently in the man who has heard all of this and the charge that closes the hour? A man who is genuinely heard, not merely listened to, but understood in the working sense, what has been described across this hour, is in a different position than he was 60 minutes ago. Not because he has been... The words individually were probably not unfamiliar to him. What has changed is the arrangement, and the arrangement has produced something that information alone does not produce, a shift in understanding that once it has genuinely occurred, cannot be reversed. I want to name specifically what has changed. He now understands that his thoughts are not private and they are not weightless. They are at every moment the instruction set from which his subconscious mind is building his circumstances. Not someday, but now continuously, whether he is paying attention or not. He cannot return to the comfortable assumption that what happens inside his mind has no bearing on what happens in his life. He has heard the mechanism. He cannot unhear it. He now understands that the worst things that have happened to him and the worst things that may yet happen carry within them something he previously assumed they could not possibly contain. A seed, not a guarantee of benefit, but a seed of one present. His own observation now confirmed across the lives of others without exception. He cannot look at a present difficulty the same way again. The question, where is the seed in this, has been planted in his own mind, and it will not leave quietly. He now understands that the habit of giving more is required, which he may have previously regarded as something close to foolishness, a way of being taken advantage of, is in fact the most reliable economic strategy available to any human being, because it is the mechanism by which capacity grows and reputation compounds. He cannot render a grudging minimal effort again without recognizing in the moment he does it exactly what he is choosing not to build. And he now understands that drift is not rest. It is motion, real effort, real fuel being consumed in a direction he did not choose toward a destination he did not select. Made permanent by a law that does not pause to ask whether he cannot spend a day without a definite aim going forward, without some part of his registering what that day is doing to the groove that will carry him through the next one. I want to close with one more story my own briefly because it belongs. At the end, when Andrew Carnegie put before me a proposal that would come to occupy 20 years of my life, a task with no guaranteed income, with every likelihood of ridicule from people whose opinions I valued, with no precedent I could point to and say, this has been done before and it worked. My first response in the privacy of my own mind was fear. The voices were immediate. Who was I to take on something of this scale? What would my family think? Did I not have more practical obligations to attend to? I accepted the assignment in 29 seconds. I want to be honest with you. The fear did not disappear in those 29 seconds. What happened was something else. I understood even in that moment, even afraid that a decision of this kind made promptly and held firmly, or the voices would simply grow louder until no decision was possible at all. I did not know in those 29 seconds how the next 20 years would unfold. I knew only that the purpose was sound, that something in me had already caught fire in response to it, and that the laws I had spent years studying, the same laws I have described to you across this hour, would operate on my behalf exactly as reliably as they had operated against every man I had watched fail. Now, if you're ready to stop learning and start seeing evidence, I built something for you. It's called the 14-Day Money Magnet Protocol. 14 days, one simple ritual a day. And the goal is concrete. Attract your first $100 out of nowhere. And here's my promise. If it doesn't happen, you get your money back. Because $100 isn't the point. It's the proof the law is working for you. Start it at theselife.com/moneymagnet. Second link in the description. Provided I held the aim without retreating from it. That is the finest sense. It contains every other law this hour has described in it. A man with a definite purpose, attached to a burning desire, pursued through organized, sustained through every temporary defeat, by the understanding that defeat carries a seed expressed through a character that gives more than it takes. That man is not merely hoping for a good outcome. He is operating in harmony with the most fundamental forces available to any human being. And those forces, once engaged, do not work half-heartedly. You came to this hour to hear something once. You have heard it. And the mind, once it has genuinely understood, does not go back. But genuine understanding is not something that happens to a man passively while he's feeling of having changed. It is seized. It is applied immediately before the hour's impression fades into the noise of the rest of the day. So before this video ends, do one thing. Name, in plain specific language in your own mind right now, the one definite thing you intend. Not someday, not when conditions improve. Now. Now is the only moment any man has ever actually had. Every other moment is either already gone or has not yet arrived and exists only in imagination. This one is real. Use it. Part 8. The Alliance of Minds. Why no man who has ever achieved anything of lasting value did it alone. I have described across this hour laws that operate within a single mind. I want to spend what remains of our time together on something that operates between minds. A phenomenon I have observed so many times in so many different forms that I am no longer able to dismiss it as coincidence come together in a spirit of perfect harmony and cooperation, directed toward a single definite objective. Something is produced that no single mind in that group could have produced alone. Not as the sum of two minds adding their capacities together, but as a third force that has no clear origin in either of them individually. I have called this the mastermind principle, and in 30 years of study, it is the one principle I found without exception behind every great fortune ever assembled. Andrew Carnegie did not build his steel empire by standing in a furnace himself. He could not have no one man's knowledge spans metallurgy, finance, negotiation, distribution, and a dozen other disciplines at once. What he built with extraordinary care and deliberate selection was a group of men, each one of them expert in some dimension of the enterprise that Carnegie himself was not. And he bound those men together through a unity of purpose so complete and a harmony so genuine that the self-intelligence available to the group at any moment exceeded what any individual within it could have brought to bear alone. When I first described this principle to Carnegie himself and asked him whether he attributed his success to it, he did not. He said that the mastermind was not a method he had discovered and applied. It was a force he had stumbled into early in his career and had never afterward been willing to operate without. I want to be precise about what the mastermind principle requires, because most men, when they hear it described, immediately think of gathering people around them. And that is not by itself the thing. A group of men assembled for a common purpose without genuine harmony, without a unity of spirit and aim, so complete that each man's success is felt as his own by every other man in the alliance that is not a mastermind. That, and committees, as any man who has sat on enough of them will tell you, produce exactly the opposite of what a mastermind produces. The harmony required is not the absence of disagreement. It is something deeper, a shared commitment to the aim that is strong enough, and a mutual respect that is genuine enough, that disagreements about method do not become fractures in the alliance. Men of strong minds will seldom agree on every detail. What separates a mastermind from a group of men in conflict is not the absence of different opinions. It is the presence of a common direction in which every different opinion ultimately points. I ask you to apply this now to your own situation, not in theory, but concretely. The definite aim you named for yourself a few moments ago, who in your life shares it with enough genuine enthusiasm that the discussion of it produces more energy than either of you brought to the room. That person, if such a person is worth more to the achievement of your aim than a decade of solitary effort. And if no such person exists yet, the most useful thing you could spend the next week doing is not a task. It is a conversation. Part 9. Faith as a working instrument. How to condition the mind until the thing desired feels already accomplished. There is a word that more than any other I have encountered in this work gets heard incorrectly by almost everyone who encounters it. The word is faith. Most men, when they hear the word faith used in the context of achievement, assume it is being used in the religious sense as a matter of belief, held despite the absence of evidence. That is not the faith I am describing. The faith I am describing is a mental state. It is an attitude assumed by the mind deliberately through repetition and practice, in which the outcome desired is accepted as already accomplished at the level of feeling before it has become accomplished in the world of external fact. The distinction matters enormously because faith in this sense is something a man can develop. It is not a gift some men are born with and others without. It is like imagination, like any other faculty of the mind, a capacity that grows through use and shrinks through neglect. And it is like imagination, like any other faculty of the mind, a capacity that grows through use and shrinks through neglect. And it can be deliberately cultivated through a method that is on its surface almost embarrassingly simple. The method is this state in the present tense, the thing you intend not as a wish, not as a hope, not as a goal that lies somewhere in the future, but as a condition that already exists. State it aloud if you are able. State it with as much feeling as you can bring to it. State it repeatedly at regular intervals until the statement begins to produce in you the emotion that would accompany the reality it describes. I want to tell you what happens mechanically. When this is done consistently, you will recall from part 1 that the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between the vividly imagined and the externally real. When you present to your subconscious mind with sufficient emotional intensity, between the vividly imagined and the externally real. When you present to your subconscious mind with sufficient emotional intensity and sufficient repetition, the statement of a thing is already accomplished. Your subconscious mind accepts that statement as a description. Conscious mind accepts that statement as a description of actual conditions. And a subconscious mind that has accepted a condition as real does something with that acceptance. It begins to arrange the behavior and the attention of its owner in ways that are consistent with that condition, noticing opportunities that match it, producing impulses that lead toward it, creating a posture in the man that others respond to differently than they respond to a man who carries doubt. I know what a careful man is thinking as he hears this. He is thinking that it sounds dangerously close to self-deception, that a man who tells himself things are true when they are not true is simply lying to himself, and that no good can come from that. I want to address this directly because it is the most common objection to this practice, and it rests on a confusion. The confusion is this. The man who declares a condition as already existing in the context of this method is not asserting that the external facts of his current situation are other than they are. He is not pretending his bank account contains what it does not contain, or that he holds a position he has not yet attained. He is doing something else entirely. He is conditioning his own mind to the emotional frequency of the man he intends to become, so that the habits, the perceptions, the unconscious communications of that man begin to operate in him now. His own mind to the emotional frequency of the man he intends to become, so that the habits, the perceptions, the unconscious communications of that man begin to operate in him now, rather than waiting until the external circumstances have been arranged. He is building from the inside out, rather than waiting for the outside to move first. The outside, as every law described in this hour confirms, has always followed the inside. It has never in the history of any man I have examined been the other way around. Part 10. The final charge. What the man who has heard all of this must now do before the hour's impression fades. I want to close by telling you something. I have observed that no man who has spent a serious hour with these laws has been able to avoid observing as well. And that is this. The distance between hearing these principles and applying them to a serious hour with these laws has been able to avoid observing as well. And that is this. The distance between hearing these principles and applying them is not a distance of knowledge. You now have the knowledge that was never the scarcity. The distance is a distance of motion. Specifically, the first motion taken within 24 hours of this hour before the impression created here has been crowded out by the ordinary demands of the day. Everything I'm teaching you comes down to one promise. You can become rich, but only once your mind is wired to attract money instead of repel it. And the fastest way to start that rewiring costs you nothing. I've put the exact daily script that programs your mind for wealth onto one free page. Go to the description right now and grab it. That's your first real step out of broke thinking and into the mind that pulls money in. Links in the description. Every law described in this hour becomes real for a man only in the moment he begins to act as though it is real. Not after he has thought about it for a week. Not after he has discussed it. In the moment of the first action that could not have been taken by the man he was before he sat down to listen for a week. Not after he has discussed it. In the moment of the first action that could not have been taken by the man he was before he sat down to listen. I have said that two men equal in intelligence and opportunity arrived 20 years later at entirely different destinations, and that the decisive difference is definiteness. I want to add one thing to that observation. The thing that decides between two equally definite men, which one arrives first and which one arrives not at all. It is this. The definite man who acts today beats the definite man who intends to act tomorrow every time without exception. Because tomorrow is the time without exception. Because tomorrow is the single most visited address in the geography of human failure. More plans have been abandoned there than in any other location. More intentions have quietly expired. They're not canceled, not rejected, simply allowed to grow cold until no warmth remained in them, than any other force or circumstance in the history of human endeavor has ever managed to stop. So I am going to give you in plain and specific language the 4 things a man who has genuinely heard this hour will do today. Not because I am asking him to, but because a man whose mind has genuinely shifted understands that the shift itself demands them. The first, he will write down in plain language his one definite chief aim, with a date attached to it, and a specific figure or description that makes it impossible with a date attached to it, and a specific figure or description that makes it impossible to confuse with a vague aspiration. Not typed, written with his own hand, because the physical act of writing impresses the subconscious mind more deeply than any other form of recording. He will read this statement aloud before he sleeps tonight and again tomorrow morning when he wakes with as much feeling as he can bring to it, and with the deliberate intention of conditioning his mind to the emotional state of the man who has already achieved it. The second, he will identify before this day is over. The single most important thing he could do tomorrow in service of that aim. Not the most comfortable thing. Not the thing he has already planned to do anyway, but the thing that would require him to act as a man who believes the aim is achievable. And he will commit to doing that one thing first before any other demand on his time has been met. The third, he will examine with honest eyes the one habit in his daily routine that is most directly in conflict with the aim he has named. The thing he does with the aim he has named. The thing he does or fails to do that he already knows, if he is honest with himself, produces the opposite of the conditions he wants. He will name it. He will not argue with himself about whether it is truly harmful or merely inconvenient. He will name it, and he will decide today that it is incompatible with the man he intends to become. The fourth, he will find one person today, one person whose judgment he respects, whose harmony with his aims is genuine rather than polite. And he will tell that person plainly and specifically what he has named as his definite chief aim, not to seek permission, not to ask for encouragement. Though encouragement may come, he will tell them because the spoken declaration made to a witness does something to the man who makes it that the private declaration cannot. It creates in the mind of the man making it a level of commitment that is qualitatively different from the commitment that lives only in silence. The ships, as I described earlier, are burned when the declaration is spoken aloud. 4 things. They are not complicated. They require no special resources, no unusual circumstances, no permission from anyone. They require only the willingness of a man who has heard something this hour to act like a man who has heard it today, before the noise of ordinary living has had the chance to return him to who he was when he started. I began this hour by telling you that the barrier between most men and greatness is not poverty, not misfortune, not circumstance. It is the quiet assumption that they already understand what they have heard. I will close by telling you that the only proof that a man has truly understood is not what he says about what he has heard. It is not the feeling of having understood, which is pleasant and fades quickly. It is not even the intention to act, which is the single most abundant commodity in the entire economy of human aspiration. The proof is what he does next. You have been given in the space of this extended hour every law I know that governs the movement of a human life from where it is to where it is capable of being. The laws do not require your belief. They operate whether you believe in them or not. They do not require your readiness. They will not wait for a more convenient season. They are operating at this moment on every thought passing through your mind, building toward whatever those thoughts most They will not wait for a more convenient season. They are operating at this moment on every thought passing through your mind, building toward whatever those thoughts most persistently describe. The only question, the only one that has ever mattered, and the only one that remains unanswered, at the end of any hour in which these laws have been heard, is whether the man who has heard them will direct those laws deliberately and with full knowledge of what he is doing toward the life he has named as his intention, or leave the direction as he always has before to chance. That answer which no one can give but you, and which will be given not in words, but in what you do within the next 24 hours, is the only thing about you that in this moment remains unknown. Quick one. If you want the money attraction law to prove itself to you fast, the 14-day money magnet protocol is designed to attract your first $100 in 2 weeks. Or you get every law to prove itself to you fast. The 14-day money magnet protocol is designed to attract your first $100 in 2 weeks. Or you get every cent back. Zero risk, real evidence. It's the second link in the description. Go grab it right now. Second link in the description. Go grab it right now.